So, first question, gang. What about Gen Z is attitudinally distinct from other generations when they were in their teens and 20s? There's some stuff that just comes up because it's youth, but what about this group is actually distinct? Who wants to kick us off? Sam's looking.
I will, just because I have the mic. I think, I think there's a lot that is, I like that phrase, attitudinally distinct, that we sort of can all know or learn about studies and ethnographies and like all that incredible like research and insights that are out there. But I think what sort of makes them the most distinct for me and how I think about like the brands I work on are communicating with them is, for lack of a better phrase, like their media literacy and their sort of like brand consumer media literacy. The fact that they, I think, just know inherently because of the way they were raised and the way that technology's been a part of their life and the way that they've been bombarded with marketing since they were little kids, probably watching YouTube videos. They just see through marketing BS a lot more, I think, like instinctively than other generations. So I think that is always kind of top of mind for me when we're thinking about what are we going to communicate and what do we need to say, how do we need to say it, and where do we need to, be. Is just knowing that like these people, this generation that we're talking to, and this is sort of applicable to everybody, but again, I think it's just Gen Z, it's like inherent to them. They get what we're trying to do, and therefore the onus is on us to be as authentic and as relevant as possible.
I'll chime in. So that was actually one of my talking points, but another is that, this generation is kind of growing up with mental health language, and a lot of us didn't really encounter that until later in life. And so these are things that they're looking for in their everyday lifestyle, whether it's where they work or the brands that they're looking to purchase from. And I think kind of what ties into that as well is a lot of what we're working on at Cox, which is sustainability and being conscientious about the future and the environment. And so we got to kind of tie that into all of our messaging as well.
So first, thanks for having me here. My name tags seem to have gone missing this morning, so if you see another Chris Elliott, this is so just wanted to cover that first. But we're hyper-focused on Gen Z at Coca-Cola, and I think one important thing about Gen Z is when you consider the life stages, and Gen Z stretches across ages 14 to 20. There's a lot of different stages within that. There's also, as you compare Gen Z to millennials, there's a lot of similarities, but when you consider just the amount of rapid cultural and tech change, there's so many factors there that make them different. Obviously, COVID-19, climate change, or major influences on that, where we then see that coming through from an attitudinal perspective, is they're very, very resourceful, very independent learners. They value diversity, value inclusion. And they're also, one thing that I thought was really interesting is they're actually a little more fiscally conservative and very focused on investing and income. And I'll say, with all that being said, Gen Alpha is just around the corner. It has a lot of similarities there, so I think, and they're on track to be the most educated and wealthiest generation on record, so maybe that's the panel we could do this time next year.
Well, I'm going to step a little. Given that we just brought up their fiscal responsibility, is that something, Sam, I'm just curious if that's something that you guys are seeing is your targeting?
Yes, but I think more broadly. Mm-hmm. So what's interesting about, as you said, I'm a Coke alum and did some work with Chris there, where and co-led marketing for the Sprite brand, and that was this incredibly focused bullseye on like young and sort of in many demographic ways, like young Black and brown influencers of culture. So not just consumers of culture, but influencers of culture. And that was like an incredible bullseye to have, that sort of like we wanted to craft messaging and communications and ways to connect there that sort of resonated out. What I'm doing now, which is like a kind of like 180-degree turn from that in this role I've been at a couple of years since Coke, is, so it's a digital bank. Varo is a digital bank. And so our who we want to sign up is a lot larger than just like this really bullseye core. And it's, as you mentioned, like we're, sort of part of our brand DNA is being a bank for all of us, like Varo's a bank for all of us. So inherent in that is inclusivity and demographics and income and sort of financial situation. So I think this is a long way of saying a lot of what we want to do is help people financially get ahead who have not gotten ahead historically. But inside that is, of course, like younger folks and Gen Z folks. So a lot of our like communication messaging is made to resonate with them, but like the message itself is a lot broader. It's like we want anybody and everybody who needs help get ahead to sign up. So in that, to get to your sort of the original question, like yes, that fiscal sort of I don't know about responsibility if that's the right word, but like just that consciousness of understanding the world, and I think that relates to the whole sort of like brand consumer literacy, like understanding what marketing is trying to do. But there's that same sort of financial literacy that's like, we find a lot of our audience, our younger segments of our audience, they're just very conscious of it. Like they understand, like I've got to start saving now, or I've got to start preparing, or I grew up, I was a preteen in like the 2008 sort of and on recession. Like I understand that I've lived through that sort of thing. I don't want to do it again. So I think that's very different than like, I didn't have that kind of like financial sort of like, awareness, I think, as a teenager. So yeah, we do see that in a very distinct sort of way than like, somebody a generation or two later.
So Chris, you recently launched a product targeted at a Gen Z audience on Minute Maid, and this was a new audience for the brand. Previously, you've been really focused on that millennial parent target, and now you're going after this younger one. So we'd love to hear about the insights that you tapped into and what you guys did, and then if you could also talk about how you kept it true to the master brand while doing things differently to appeal to the audience, because I think that's something that I imagine a lot of marketers can relate to.
Awesome. Has anyone heard of Minute Maid Aguas Frescas in the room? Maybe beyond my friends in the room. Okay, awesome. So I'll talk a little bit about what we've done with Aguas Frescas. We launched it last year. If you haven't tried it yet, you should. We saw a white space within juice because really when you think about Gen Z, they think of juice drinks as maybe boring, something their parents gave to them when they were kids. At the same time, we started seeing a sizable increase of Aguas Frescas in restaurants. So think places like a Chipotle or a Blaze Pizza, for example. I think there was something like a 50% increase in Aguas Frescas in restaurants over like a 5-year period there. So clear white space in the grocery cooler and in the convenience store. So in comes our opportunity there. As a driving insight, we really saw Gen Z as being discovery seekers here. So having adventurous palates, being privy to global cultural trends. And so as they seek those new opportunities for novelty and discovery, this was the product for it. And meanwhile, mainstream juice, I think, to be fair, could feel like a sea of sameness for them. So that was the opportunity, and in comes Minute Maid Aguas Frescas as that Latin American-inspired beverage to which they could gravitate. So that's definitely breaking from the norm when you think about Minute Maid, a 75-plus-year-old brand, introducing this to the market with Gen Z. So we needed a disruptive marketing plan that would be equally different there. So that was totally different in terms of the touch points we leveraged on how we invested our paid media specifically, and in the overall creative platform we used. So the creative platform there is called Refreshing AF, which the AF definitely stands for Aguas Frescas. So, but we sought to launch it in a way that would really be different. And our guiding principle there was we should say and do what your childhood juice drink doesn't. So with that, I'll say we're doing it in kind of everything that we do. And in that, we recently featured the product in a Cardi B music video. My colleague Jordan back there had a big hand in, but with that piece, I don't think we're going to show the video here today. You can go watch it on your own time. But I think that's really showing our ambition to break from that cycle of predictability and where we show up and really give that refreshing perspective on life and culture. So while this may be a surprise for the 75-plus-year-old Minute Maid brand, I think we are staying true to the overall brand mission, which is to help anyone, anywhere feel alive. And so with that, who better than us to go take on that white space when we're already in about half of households already, which might surprise you. So this was the opportunity for us to build that with the next generation. And I'll just also say couldn't be more proud of the team and all the work we've done there and making sure that we disrupt and bring it to life differently.
Do you guys have any other examples of brands that you think pivoted, innovated, or expanded well to encompass this Gen Z target?
So we'll talk about this in a moment, but a lot of my background is in the entertainment industry across TV, film, music, products, etc. And one of the biggest licensors or licensees, is Funko Pops. I'm sure you guys probably heard of those. And that is actually, that collector behavior in consumers is a behavior that we see across generations. So, it started, if you think about like the Trolls back in the 80s, and then now Funko is one of those big brands. And we really, I worked at Paramount Global on the consumer products division and on the global franchise planning team. And that was one of our big licensees to pitch to every year because they were constantly adapting. And one of the things that they did that was so special was creating a community of collectors. And if you've ever been to San Diego Comic-Con, they have an event called Funko Fridays. And it's pretty epic and wild, and you really get to see in person what that Funko fan, that core demo is. And it really is about creating a community of people who love a certain IP and want to buy as many versions of that thing to hold up on a shelf that they can display to people. So just wanted to share that the collector kind of behavior is something that we do see having that multi-generational appeal, and Funko is one of the great examples of that. It's great.
So one of the things I know is really important to marketers is figuring out how do we actually learn more about Gen Z? What tools and methods are really good for getting to rich insights that just feel unique and distinctive and things that can be acted upon? So would love to hear from you guys on some of the tools and methods you've used to learn more about Gen Z. Chris, I know you were referencing some research you guys had at Coast. Maybe you can kick us off.
Yeah. So I can share a fascinating project I took part in, and since we've talked about Minute Maid, I'll switch gears and talk about Sprite for this one, but this was actually more global in nature. So last year we brought across all of Coc's global operating units, there were about 50 plus of us internally who worked to do these Gen Z versions around the world to actually understand from them, like on their own terms and their own words. And so there was kind of a mix of tactics within the overall version. So each of these Gen Z participants submitted a recorded video before we even talked to them. And then as we talked to them, it was kind of like, what space do they want to meet us in? Could it be in their favorite place to hang out, and for example, and actually do these video chats with us in which we could ask questions, hear their responses or their takes on things. There were also diary exercises. So it was kind of all different ways for however they could best express themselves. But I think the interesting thing to me coming out of all of it was having that opportunity to see Gen Z in different parts of the world. There were more similarities than differences, like whether we were talking to someone in Singapore versus Chicago. Like if you look at this cohort, their themes really, and what those threats really ran throughout. I'll say one other approach pretty unique to Coca-Cola is that I'll share is that we do have a network of college ambassadors, or campus ambassadors, I should say, and our partner colleges and universities around the country. So as you think about that, there really are feet and voices on the ground. And so what a great opportunity to have them influence within the individual campuses, but to also hear their feedback and understand how they're interacting with brands. Had an opportunity along with Jacqueline a few weeks ago to have a mentorship lunch with some of them while they were on campus, and I think totally saw firsthand how things line up to their resourcefulness and their drawing. So saw that in person, but those are just a few examples.
That's great. That's great.
I love the creative approaches. And it makes sense that you'd see this kind of maybe more global consistency across this generation, given what they have access to in terms of tools. So it's cool. Awesome. Have you guys ever come across some insights that really just dispelled an assumption that you maybe went into about Gen Z, like, and then you, through research, discovered, oh, it's been unknown. We've done some like Gen Z panels for an innovation project we were working on, and we were like, there were just these nuances that came out of the end that we just realized we had all these kind of preconceived notions about who they were. We like knew they valued social justice and environmental responsibility, but then from the groups we heard, yes, that's important, but then it's also because they really value transparency, and it's rooted in that, and they value humanity, and it's rooted in this care about people. So that's just an example of one that was like, oh, it's actually a bit different. So anything that's come up for you guys about, yeah, that's a bit different than what you thought going in?
Yeah, so this is something that comes to mind actually from my previous life at Coke and actually on Sprite. It was sort of like one era before I think the work Chris and his teams are leading currently. But it was very, U.S. focused. But we did it very similarly, like these really interesting focus groups. But they were more than focus groups because they were, one, we set them up to meet, to sort of tap into and connect with over time. It wasn't just like one group randomly and then 6 months later find 10 new people. It was a group of young people here in Atlanta, and we sort of tapped into them using this really incredible like youth marketing research firm. And again, sort of to that point about I said earlier how the focus there was like not just consumers of culture, it's specifically hip hop culture, but influencers of culture. So it was this really in-depth, and we trusted our partner to find people who were not just like fans of hip-hop or listen to hip-hop, because that's probably like 95% of America at this point, but like kids, and I say kids lovingly, who are doing things, creating things. So these were like producers and designers and party promoters and, people who ran, Instagram accounts. They met over time at Wish here in Atlanta, like a gallery space, the sneaker boutique in Atlanta. So it was very much like, to Chris's point, it was like in your space. It's not in like a sterile conference room on our terms, but it's like where you would be. But the sort of assumption I think that was dispelled very quickly was we went in, I think a lot of our sort of like what we were wanting to learn from them was like, what do you like hearing about? And like, what are you interested in? What do you want to hear from brands? Or what do you want to, the parts of hip hop culture would you like us to be in? And it was, I think very clearly, like the first meeting, it was like, yeah. Like everybody can do that. Like, sure, Sprite does that. Like Sprite's ads are on the right place, in the right places, or like have the right talent. But like, what can you actually do to help me do the things I'm doing? To actually like give me a platform or give me a step up to actually help sort of like progress in what I'm doing, whether it's producing music or throwing parties or starting a record label, or I need some help for the art I want to make. And that really led to a lot of the work we did about this sort of like, how can we help put people on and like use Sprite's spotlight to shine it on people who don't already have a whole giant spotlight on them. So that was I think that kind of, after this first kind of focus group session, we had a better name for it. It wasn't a focus group, I can't remember it, but it quickly kind of shifted our entire strategy. And I think we never would have known that unless we talked to real Gen Z kids. And, if we just like looked up Mintel reports and, kind of found some insights online. So it was a pivot, but that surprised us all, but it was like a great surprise.
And got you into be able to behave really authentically, and then when you talked about in the beginning and how that's so important, that's great. I love that. Yeah, so, and of course.
I'll be quick, but I thought this was a really cool one, actually coming from the Sprite global versions that I mentioned. So really around layers of identity, because I think the assumption that I had made going into it was, yes, most diverse generation ever until Gen Alpha, but digging into that, there's actually like more layers to Gen Z identity. We called this, the term we used was also me and this, but actually in talking to them was like they take on layers of identity versus when who's around, and kind of cater to their audience in that way, which I think maybe to other generations that might seem inauthentic, but in Gen Z's eyes, it's really not. It's knowing their audience and how they continue to adapt and evolve. So I thought that was super interesting. I would also say that's a factor for us on our team, one of several factors of we don't use the term general market anymore. What is general market today? So that's like something that's retired from our vocabulary, and that's one of the reasons why.
That's great. Sam, I want to hear more from you on like how, in your current role, you've used cultural trends to inform brand partnership with Varo, and maybe you could share a little bit about how you came to some of those, and then also with entertainment being part of your role, hearing a bit more about how what marketers should be considering when it comes to entertainment marketing this month.
Yeah. So at Varo, as I kind of nodded to, it's just a totally different world than being at the Coca-Cola company in a really good way. It's a fintech startup. It's private. It's a lot smaller. It's at a very just different sort of life cycle as a company and as a brand. And it's a bank. Previously, I was selling soda. And there's a lot of different decisions that go into like sort of how to engage with a brand or a company like that. One advantage I had coming in was that one of our key investors is Russell Westbrook through the NBA player, through his sort of business arm. And he's kind of not as widely known as him being an NBA player, but like he's an incredibly successful businessman. And has an incredible team that have made investments across all sorts of different industries. But that was just like, look, we got a lot smaller budgets. We got a lot sort of smaller, a lot less channels, honestly. So we have to tap into and kind of be a little more scrappy. Not that we weren't scrappy with Sprite. So from day one, sort of once I knew like, okay, I'm coming into this organization, and I knew Russell and especially his fashion line or his sort of like fashion interest was absolutely something that we had to like use to our advantage. It was just sort of built in. And in addition to him being an investor, like we have a marketing agreement with him and all that kind of good stuff. So, but that was just like, it was authentic. It wasn't, hey, we got this marketing partner who's an NBA superstar and has giant spotlights on him all the time and has gazillions of Instagram followers. Let's put him in a commercial and try to get him to like act or something. Although he did some interesting, fun stuff for us kind of online. But like, I use this term a lot, like, let's draft off of him. Like, he's already interested in fashion. He already has a very cool, very sort of in the like streetwear space, well-respected fashion brand with stores, and he's in retailers and has a following. Like, let's draft off of that. And so I think part of it was like expanding, as I came in with this remit of like entertainment marketing will be an important part of growing Varo. A lot has changed since I joined the company about 2 years ago. And so I think the definition of for us, like what is entertainment grew. It sort of had to like naturally follow where our opportunities were. And so I think that was just a key. It was like, let's follow natural kind of authentic paths that our brand and our company already has connections with. And so we've done some interesting things with him in that world of fashion and in, recognizing that's something he's good at. He's got a team that does well. We can tap into that. We know really well who we are as a bank and like what value we provide to consumers and people looking to get ahead financially. We don't have to like reinvent our brand to partner with him. We don't have to like try to fit in some sort of category that's just like a really crazy, weird contortion for us. So I think that's just kind of has been our strategy, is drafting off of people and parts of culture that are already happening. Like a little bit of it I think is like humility that like, we're a startup fintech. Like we're probably not going to be influencing or directing culture at this point. So let's tap into people and brands and partners that are, and sort of just find good synergy there.
Well, no matter the size, that idea of pursuing the organic paths for you and identifying where do you kind of naturally go into versus trying to be like,
Gen Z strategy. We're pivoting to here. We're using these entirely different channels, entirely different people. It just doesn't feel it feels forced. So
That's really great. So when thinking about the media mix, comms planning, and go-to-market strategy with Gen Z, what are some considerations that would be helpful for the group here to know?
So I'm about 3 months in at Cox, guys. So that's why I'm speaking a little bit about that, as well as my background in entertainment as well. But something that we are doing at Cox that it speaks to that value of authenticity with the new generation is telling people stories and getting in touch with our employees and understanding what do they love about Cox. And kind of a term that I'm going to be talking all about is the fandom of Cox. And it's very, very strong, and people feel very connected to the business, what they're doing, the company supports them. And so we have a new campaign called Power of Connection that has been launching. And through that, we're telling the stories of what Cox does as a business, but how does it really impact people, and not only our consumers, but also people in the company as well. And also from a, you know what? Just to tie in that sustainability piece, we're really it's a core value of Cox that has been in existence for decades before the trend of being green. And so, for example, one of the things that we're doing as a company is zero waste operations, and we've actually achieved that goal earlier than expected. And so these are things that we're tying into our messages to make sure people understand it's not just a greenwashing scenario. It really is something that if you join the company, you're expected to kind of deliver on at a daily basis as well. So that's something that we're looking at as a future appeal for that Gen Z audience.
That's great. More of that real authenticity and making sure you can offer that transparency. That's great. Any other thoughts on comms planning?
So I'll say one from a Coca-Cola perspective is we really tried to focus on where we can have two-way conversations versus pushing out one-sided communications, and we referred to that as experiences over exposures, and what do you find that right balance there. I think also just looking to the marketplace, like this summer with McDonald's and the Grimace shake, I think that's a really great example of it. And seeing one of our old colleagues from Coca-Cola who's there, in a recent Adweek interview, she was talking about it and referred to it as like they shared the pen with Gen Z, and I think that's exactly kind of what you have to do here, and it takes some courage to give up that control. But I think that's a consideration you have to think about with Gen Z. So maybe a little bit of risk there, but it can be worth it when you might be creating the next Grimace.
Yeah, I love it. So Justice, you talked a little bit about your past role in entertainment, and you similarly, we were hearing he and Sunny talk about these entertainment franchises that are now relevant for their kids as well. So I would love to hear about some of the projects you worked on where you were bringing entertainment to entertainment franchises and properties of previous generations to the current one. And so how did you go about making these properties relevant for the current generation?
Yeah, so while on the consumer products team, I was over the Star Trek, Avatar, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles franchises, and we kind of categorized that as superfan or multi-generational brands. So I'll use Turtles as an example because if you've seen, there was a recent movie released in August, and that is us reviving the brand from 36 years and Turtle Mania back in the 90s. How do we kind of try to replicate that now? And if you are in the consumer products industry, you know the lead time is about 18 months. So we've been planning against that movie for 2 years. So back in 2021, our strategy really leaned on, again, what are some appeals that are multi-generational? I already spoke to the collector audience, but another trait is, or category is gaming. That's something that's going to be here and continue innovating and continuing to be a key category for Gen Z and beyond. as well as nostalgia. And I thought that was great in the Globetrotters side chat that got brought up as well. So with those two, we devised a strategy to maintain our core adult audience, who is about 35 to 45 male, who loved the comics and the show. And how do we now bring in this next generation with this new theatrical? So one of the things that I thought was really cool that the filmmakers did was all of the past Turtles iterations have always been voiced by a man who was 35 plus, and they're actually teenagers, right? So, you know, this time around, Seth Rogen's team really casted kids that no one knew, but they're actually teenagers. So that vocabulary would actually resonate with someone today versus Cowabunga or totally radical, you know? So those were some of the things that in consumer products we were trying to tie in. And as we're pitching our key retailers, Walmart, Target, Amazon, we developed, we really pulled our global fandom studies together, and insights we got from that is fandom and love of fandom is passed down from generation to generation. So kind of a cool UGC component was if you think about a parent sharing them in their Turtles pajamas and now their kids in their Turtles pajamas. And we use those as kind of case studies to pitch to those big retailers. And so those are some of the things around Turtles that worked really well. On Avatar, this is a brand that was had its heyday in the 2000s, didn't really have a strong licensing program built around it. But what was really interesting was it was being re-released on Netflix. And that streaming, the power of streaming could not be underestimated, because we took a brand that was on cable, put it on streaming, and now we have such a high demand from a Gen Z audience, when previously it was just like older millennials who knew about Avatar. So we used that to build a strategy around what's called the specialty retail segment. So if you think about Hot Topic, Box Lunch, FYE, we really tapped into the values that those brands can, not necessarily Hot Topic, but some of the values that they align to. So really big on collector, really big on trends. And anime is actually one of the fastest growing genres in licensing. So Avatar aligned well with that. We found a way to pitch to Box Lunch, a really strong retail program, where we had tons of support, you know, windows, displays, etc., aligned to Demon Slayer, for example, which is a big anime property right now. And so yeah, that was like an emerging trend that we saw with Gen Z and tried to tie in Avatar there. And those are a couple of examples from my past life.
Great. I want to open it up for some questions, just for kind of shine.
Yeah. All right. We can open for questions. Peter.
Question for anybody. You spoke a little bit about one trend you're seeing with this generation is care about sustainability and being transparent with that. How have you all, in your past lives or in your current in your jobs, made sure that that's authentic? Because we also mentioned that they don't like inauthenticity and can see right through that. Is there any markings or examples that you have or watch-outs there? As a lot of brands or CPG companies and products are moving in that direction.
I can just speak to consumer products industry. What we're seeing, I kind of alluded to it earlier, is this, because we know this is a trend, everyone wants to find a way to say they're doing something sustainable. And, you know, the term is greenwashing, right? That you're not, on the surface level it is, but if you dig deeper, there's probably layers of negative impact on the environment. Really dig into it. So something that we really did was anytime we would partner with a licensee or we sold the IP to a brand that was being perceived as sustainable, we really had to check in, and we actually partnered with some ESGs and consulting companies to help us just kind of check that what they're saying is actually true and what are the layers under that, just in case the internet investigators somehow found out and called us on it. So that's a little bit of what we did.
Chris, you mentioned their age is now 14 and 28. And this is for all of you as experts. How much of the descriptions and what we've described this group is going through is just because they're 14 to 28 and they're coming of age, don't have money, and versus the fact that they are truly Gen Z? And so like, what are the real uniques? Really gonna be that it's the yes, we know they're digital natives, but beyond that, versus just they're in the coming of age generation, and therefore this is what where this look.
I would happy to chime in. I think there's an element there beyond the previous generations at the same age. Just when you think of all the cultural drivers they're in, the tools that they have, like one big part of it, I feel like, is their willingness to challenge the status quo. Social media helps with that, to be able to be able to share your opinions in that way, and maybe future generations in the way they didn't have that. And I think this generation is very empowered in that way. So I think there's something there that makes them different, and which lends to the whole of they see through it, and when they see through it, they're going to voice it. So I think the tools that they have and the things that have happened in culture go beyond some of the previous generations.
They also are in this more fragmented media landscape, right, as we talked about. And I think as a result of that, the way that trends show up is not as consistent. So you start seeing it more becomes like, what are the different things I'm going to adopt to be this individual me? And like one of the phrases we used when we were doing some Gen Z work was like, they kind of like to be a curated mess. But it's like they're very intentional about these, all these different individual aspects. And it's not just about, I feel like we had more, broader trends in younger generations. But like when I'm at the top end of the millennial, and I think when there were consistent trends, and now it's like you kind of are picking what you want to tap into because they have access to so many more brands and outlets.
Since we're all three of you, who do you think's doing the best job, and a bonus for a brand that's doing the best job that would surprise me? They can't be a Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
I won't get the bonus points because this won't surprise you, and Chris already brought up McDonald's, but I think that's my answer. I mean, again, not terribly surprising at this point because they've done so much amazing stuff in the last 5 years. But what I think, and it's sort of the point of like I hadn't heard that, but like sharing the pen with Gen Z. But what I think is most sort of interesting or sort of insightful about that is, since I think it's 2 or 3 of our colleagues from Coke, from our sort of era, are at McDonald's now. So like when I see them get written up on LinkedIn or like post new work or see like an Adweek article or something, I recognize a couple of the names. And also McDonald's, a lot of the work, if not all the work they're doing in America is with Wyden Kennedy out of New York, I think, which is who we partnered with on Sprite. So I like still recognize some of the names of like the agency folks, like the creative teams. And I think the best sort of takeaway from that is that like I know some of the creative directors and I see them post about it, but like they're not just sharing the pen with Gen Z, but like the associate art director and the like junior copywriter are like 23-year-olds, and that's like, don't just share the pen with them, give them the pen. I think as much as we all are, and probably everybody in this room are like really great consumers of culture and media and like know how to think about audiences and communications, I'm not going to know it inherently like in my bones the way a 23-year-old is. And so I think that's something I think about, and like I'm not building a massive team of like creatives right now. We're sort of like in the market per se for a world-class agency just because of the nature of like the company I'm at, the work we're trying to do, and sort of where we are. But that's always in like the takeaway there for me is like hire, partner with, like give the pen to people who are living in the spaces you want to be in.
I can share one I'm envious of. To say, I think Nike does a great job as we think about those layers of identity, right? Like I think they do a great job of representing that in their comms and in their creative as you see that sort of representation. And then on top of that, very envious of the first party data that I assume they probably have behind all that too. But
Any other questions?
This might be a more nuanced question, but the topic for this session was aligning your brand with Gen Z's needs. And for me, at Mercedes-Benz, Gen Z can't necessarily afford our product. So our target consumer is Gen X and Boomers. But obviously, we need to be aligning with Gen Z's needs as well. So I would be curious as far as both your current or past backgrounds, as far as, how do you focus on who's buying your product, but also cultivate the future consumers as well. Not really. Thoughts or concepts there?
I think there's a piece that, like taking the Minute Maid example of, if you can make someone a fan and build that consumption now and fitting with what they're looking for in terms of their taste, then maybe when they are that, parent, then they're buying another Minute Maid product to serve to their family. So how do you build that, that drink there and out that can make your day future?
Thank you guys all so much, and we're gonna send everybody over the hallway for some lunch.